this is a huge topic for all independent agents because the future really holds tremendous amount of promise, but it's all about understanding the changes that are coming down and being prepared for them. So this agenda up here, we're just going to, first I want to say that there's no such thing as a tech business anymore. I mean, every business is now in the tech business. We used to, years ago, as agents, we're agents first, and we would use technology in some ways, sometimes begrudgingly. But nowadays, the way technology has moved and where we are with data and all, we need to really embrace technology, embrace data, because that's where the future is. It's clear to me and anybody that I speak with that the basis for all advancement going forward are going to be a combination of data and technology, and how do we bring those two together? At the forefront here is just an incredible, unprecedented change, and yet as logically as we can understand that real improvement doesn't happen without change, there's still a human reluctance to change, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And of course, much of the change will be driven by, quite frankly, consumer expectations and the competition. And I think that the forefront of what independent agents are going to be able to use going forward is artificial intelligence. Now, most of us think of artificial intelligence as something like Star Wars. It's way beyond our reach. What I want to do here today is explain in very layperson's terms what artificial intelligence is, what it means to how we will be able to use it going forward, and explain that really it should be thought of as nothing more than an augmented intelligence, augmenting our human intelligence. And it's really a tool that can be used to drive the ageless independent agency value proposition.
You know, Bruce, I think that another thing here, the thing we ought to put in people's minds as we get started on this is so valuable to the future, and it's necessity to run our business. And I think that those of you who are listening, make sure that your staff gets to listen to this. And this is going to be a great one, I know, because I've been working with Bruce. This is going to be a great one for a meeting. So your monthly or average, whatever, weekly meeting or something, boy, this is one to talk about. So Bruce, go ahead.
Okay, so we're obviously experiencing breathtaking change, but you know that's nothing new. Change has been the bellwether of human existence since we first walked out of the caves. You know, there's an expression that change or improvement really can't happen without change. Something has to change for something to improve. But independent agents really have seen a very slow pace of change. Part of it's because the insurance industry in general is pretty much on the back end of the whole technological revolution. But make no mistake about it, we're being consumed by it now, and it's something we really need to address going forward. So, as I say, the essence of business change is faster. How do we do it faster? How do we do it better? And how do we do it at a lower cost? Those three things, faster, better, and a lower cost, are the three drivers of business change. The difference today is that change is becoming transformational. As we do that, it becomes overwhelming. It's like an avalanche of change that's happening all at one time, and it's requiring all of us to use new skill sets in order to be able to perform in the way that we have historically to meet our customers' expectations. So what are some of the drivers of change? Obviously, data and technology. I said before that every business is now in a tech business. Those who don't embrace the technology and embrace data will be some of the losers. Consumers' expectation now is driven up. Consumers expect a great customer experience, and a lot of that has to do with ease of access and, of course, technology. Consumers every day are looking for more. They just want more, and that's what's driving us. So we talk about the pace of change, but the biggest obstacle in my mind to change is legacy thinking. I can't tell you the number of times I speak with agents and I get the response, why should I change what has made me a success up to now?
I hear that all the
I mean,
time.
if you are a success, and that's what's made you a success, and I think there's a psychological thing going on here. If we don't understand something, and if we think that something like artificial intelligence is way beyond our capability, then the human cocoon develops, and we then just put our heads down and continue to do what we're doing all along. This is what's made me a success. I'm going to continue to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that can be very dangerous, of course. It's the same old thing. If we do things over and over again, what did Einstein say is a definition of insanity, is doing the same things over and over again and expecting the same results.
Right.
Or expecting new results, excuse me.
New results, yeah, something different.
So,
right.
So what we have here is, let me step back for a second. Up to now, all change has been pretty much evolutionary. I mean, change happened over a long period of time, and we had the luxury of being able to observe what was going on and decide at what point we were going to jump in. The problem now is the change is happening so fast that it can overwhelm us, and before we know it, we're in danger. So it's the analogy of how do you boil a frog? Now, you put a frog in a nice cool pan of water, you put the heat under it, the water starts to warm up, the frog's getting nice and comfortable now, it's getting warm and fuzzy, it gets a little hotter, and pretty soon he gets drowsy, and eventually the frog falls asleep, then the water boils, and the frog dies. And
Good.
I don't know about you, George, but we're committed here to make sure that our agencies aren't the frogs who get boiled in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I got to get back here a second.
All right. All right. There you are again, your picture. Okay.
Yeah, well, I got a slide here that
Okay.
sequence.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so we're talking about the pace of change. You've heard about Moore's Law.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Moore's Law was named by Intel co-founder Gordon Moore in 1965, and he predicted that the number of transistors incorporated in a chip will approximately double every 24 months. And pretty much throughout history since 1965, that's pretty much been the case. Moore's Law suggests that over time we're just going to continue to ramp up. Change becomes exponential. And then there's a concept which we call the law of accelerating improvement. And that's simply put that the more we learn, the more we know, that enables us to learn more, and then we know more, in which each step along the way gets us to a higher point of learning. And quite frankly, it becomes exponential in nature. So let's take a look at Moore's Law. Let's graphically take a look at what this really means. Now here's a graph. It's a theoretical graph showing that if we do double our capacity to compute every 2 years, then 10 years we will have increased our capacity of computing 32 times. And each one of these units down below here is 2 years. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that in 10 years, so we can see that there's an interesting curve there. Okay, and it's not linear. It's become somewhat exponential, but still it's pretty seemingly manageable. But let's take that out 20 years. Right now we're down 20 years, and we've increased our computing capacity multiplied by over 1,000 times.
Oh God!
And you see that curve now at 10 years begin to really ramp up. Well, let's just push that out 100 years and take a look at this.
Oh my God! Look at those numbers.
We're talking about hundreds, thousands, millions, trillions, billions, quadrillions. We're talking about 1.2 quadrillion times the computing capacity that we started out with 100 years back. Now you know what I'm saying when we talk about how fast the rate of change is being driven, and this is a huge piece of it. And so I suggest, and I'm not just the only one, there are hundreds of people who believe this, that we're going to see more change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 25 years. It's one of those things that hold on to your hat, tighten your seatbelt. We're going for a rocket ship ride. So let's break it down to its component parts. This is really not as unfathomable as a lot of people think it might be. The learning process is really a I don't know why it's doing this here. Learning process is a sequential iterative process, meaning that we learn something and then we learn something more and we expand our knowledge, so on and so forth. And so we talked a little bit earlier about the law of accelerated improvement. Basic human expectation says improvement will happen on a linear basis. But historically, we know that it actually happens on an exponential basis. And Moore's law is just an example of that. So let me give you a real-life example of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to when you and I were in high school, George. We learned the multiplication tables. You know, our teachers beat it into us over and over, and 2 times 2 equals 4, 4 times 4 equals 16, so on and so on and so on. So this is the way in which we were able to do simple mathematical computations in our head. Okay? And then years later, generation later, and I remember when Heather was in, my daughter Heather, now was 38 years old, was in school, they didn't learn the multiplication tables anymore because now we had these little things called pocket calculators. And what that did was enable the students to jumpstart their learning process, so they didn't have to worry about the multiplication tables because they had it right here on their little calculator.
Right.
And that became a tool that everybody used. And now we start getting into higher levels of mathematical theory and learning in school. And then the next generation comes along, and guess what? We now have tablets.
Wow.
Kids go to school with tablets. They don't go to school with multiplications tables. They don't even need the calculator. They get everything right there, and they're using the tablets, of course, to access information all over the world over the internet. My point here is that this now enables the students of today to not have to burden their minds with all of that in your head mathematical calculations. It enables them to extend their learning process that much further.
Yeah,
This is an example.
Excuse me. It makes the fathers and grandfathers like you and me know that we were born way too soon. It embarrasses me. They know so much.
You know, you go to the store today, and some of the clerks at the store, if they didn't have the cash register, which is actually a computer, doing the computations for them in terms of what the change should be, some of them can't make change because of that. But the point is, that's just an example of the sequential iterative process of learning.
That's good. So
let's step back 40 years. 40 years ago, quite frankly, when I first came into business, these were the tools of the trade. Remember mimeographs, get our hands all filled with this purple ink. Filing cabinets. I mean, I go to an office today that has filing cabinets, and I want to think, how far back in time they are. Back then, we had multi-part carbon paper forms.
Uh-huh.
So I remember we used to issue invoices with multi-part carbon paper forms and mail the top part to the customer and file the other one away. And then along came a huge increase in technology. We went to NCR forms. We didn't have to use carbon paper anymore. Okay, so the selective typewriter.
Yep.
Remember that? That was actually that's the first iteration of a word processing machine, because you could do form letters on that. My dad had as his bookkeeper a woman who had used a machine called a comptometer. I can't explain to you without a picture here, but the comptometer was a mechanical machine that she used to press buttons down and mechanically would add, subtract, multiply, and divide. The Rolodex. I mean, we use the term Rolodex now, but what does it mean? We used to actually have cards and card catalogs.
Absolutely.
Right? And then there was a wet process photocopy process. We call it the Xerox process now, but we used to call it photocopy because you actually took a photo of the image and it went through the emulsion process. And I can remember vividly, if you wanted to use that photocopy right away, you had to stand shaking it so it would dry out. And then it, of course, came along the Apple II, and the first iteration for agency management systems was, of course, the original batch processing. So, I mean, but those were the tools that we used back then. So, along comes data, and I want to say, and I've seen some interesting articles about this. A lot of people now believe that data is the new electricity, meaning just as electricity changed every business 100, 150 years ago, so will data and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, quite frankly, is just a means of being able to evaluate and to be able to make sense of the data. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest inhibitor in the whole process is the human brain capacity.
Mm-hmm.
The human brain is the greatest computer ever devised. We can logically think, we can put ideas together, we can draw comparisons, we can do all kinds of incredible things, but the one thing that slows us down and one thing that keeps us from getting to the next level is just the bandwidth of human capacity. There's only so much that we can put into our brains. So think of artificial intelligence really as nothing more than like adding RAM to your computer or adding a hard drive. If you want to increase the space I have to collect and analyze data, and I've run out of space on my, I just add another hard drive. So think about artificial intelligence as adding a hard drive.
Okay.
So now what has really made artificial intelligence on the precipice here is it's a huge explosion of computing power. We talked about that, Moore's law, accelerating learning. And of course, we're creating more data today than has ever been created in the history of the world. And you put those together and you have the capability of being able to get to another level here. So the next iteration in all this was enable to machines to recognize data. We're now in what you might call the brute force computing era, where we're really just crunching a huge amount of numbers, and we're on the precipice with machine learning and such that eventually we're going to now be able to take those numbers and actually do something with them that is really transformational. And this is where the excitement comes, and that, quite frankly, leads to artificial intelligence. So the four things that go into creating artificial intelligence, or the three things that combine with artificial intelligence, are data, computing power, and of course pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is a huge step that leads to artificial intelligence. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what is artificial intelligence? It's simply the capacity of a computer to perform operations analogous to learning and decision making in humans. Now that sounds scary, but again, let's break it down a little bit. So the first step in data comprehension, I'm going to use image recognition as an example.
Okay.
So the first step is, and how does a computer do this? First step it does is identify individual pixels. A pixel is a minute piece of a picture, okay? And if you're looking at resolution, this is really where we're talking about how many pixels can fit on the screen. So the computer first looks at individual pixels, all right, and starts to make sense of the individual pixels, and then puts the pixels together and starts creating a shape. Okay, and you see the second picture here. Something is shaping. We don't know really what it is, but the more you move out of this process, then you get to the image, and now this image starts to get clearer. And as you go out further, we find that this is really a frog. But how do we know that from the beginning? We build it step by step by step. And that's exactly how the computer does it in terms of recognizing images. And that analogy can be used over and over again in terms of how data is analyzed and how we come to the kind of conclusions that we can come to.
Well, that was a great slide. It really that brings it all together. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's not as complicated. I mean, a huge amount of mathematics behind it, but this is in its simplistic form. So we've now come to the point where we can take this data, and as opposed to, and up to now, every single computer program was designed by someone, a programmer, and it only could do what the program programmed it to do. It couldn't think for itself. So the big breakthrough in recent years has been this thing called machine learning. And simply what that means is that the machine is going to go through a sequential step of learning in a sequential iterative learning process. And as it goes through that learning process, the more you tell it, the more it learns, it can then draw conclusions, that it can then become smarter, okay? So as an example, we wouldn't have broken the human genome code back in the 90s without the huge computing capacity that has evolved. It's just that over and over that we kept on learning and learning and learning, and eventually we cracked the code. The same thing goes for the future of autonomous cars. Autonomous cars are going to be made possible, are being made possible, by the machine learning and the input of huge amounts of data and allowing the machine to be able to recognize what it's coming up upon.